and we'll send out replay information at the end. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, we're going to talk about our new platform, Semaphore Cloud Development. We'll tell you a little bit about the benefits. We have some great flexible options that you can use to meet the needs that you have. We'll talk a little bit about the functional capabilities of Semaphore. We'll talk about our products and services. And we'll give you some great use cases of customers who are currently using Semaphore Cloud. And then my cohort Steve will give you a demonstration, a live demonstration of Semaphore Cloud Development. He'll talk about a few support options, and then we'll wrap it up with Q&A. So what is Semaphore Cloud Development? Semaphore Cloud is Smartlogic's, it's our cloud solution for clients who don't want to manage Semaphore in their environment on-premise. And as you can see, we have three options. We have a non-production development option, which is the option we're going to talk about today. And this is for organizations, or this is for partners and developers who want to do, test out the features and functions, work on POCs, and try to integrate it into their existing solution. And then we have our standard Semaphore Cloud, which is also an entry-level production, and then we have our full enterprise scale. So as you can see, it's a kind of a full suite of products. So actually, what is it? It's a software as a service platform. As I said earlier, it's a low-cost, non-production environment that allows our partners and developers to incorporate this platform, excuse me, into their products and solutions. It can be quickly provisioned so that you can immediately start working on it and see the features and functions in Semaphore. And as I said, the platform is a really good space to develop proof of concept application and to incorporate the great capabilities of Semaphore into your product development. So the benefits. So it's a low-cost development environment. It's non-production. It's a modular approach, so you can choose the services you need, and we'll see what the services are in just a minute. As I said, you can test out assumptions and solutions for new business cases. You can explore integration with new and existing applications, and we have a great set of documentation and sample applications that we can help you with. And Steve will show you those later. He'll show you where to locate those later on in the presentation. And because you're not administering it, you can focus on the things that you really want to focus on, which is solving business problems in your organization. So our first option is modeling. So in our modeling option, we give you the full life cycle management capabilities that allow you to create and maintain enterprise vocabularies. And with that is in that selection is Ontology Editor, which is our tool that allows you to create and develop models. Our Ontology Review tool, which allows you to interact with subject matter experts and get feedback and review of the ontology, and Semantic Enhancement Server. And this option allows you, as I said, to maintain your models. Our second one adds in our auto classification, and this allows people, developers and partners who are building solutions where they want to enhance the user experience. So in this situation, you still have the modeling and the semantic enhancement server, but we've added our auto classification. And in there is classification server, which does the auto classification, and classification review tool, which Steve is actually going to show you later, but it allows you to look at the results of the classification so you can see exactly what triggered and why. And fact extraction. And when we get to this option, it allows us to extend solutions to incorporate those things like entity fact and complex relationship extraction. And this is an add-on to the standard Semaphore, which was the option you just saw, and it adds our advanced language packs. And finally, our search application framework. And this allows you to take what you've created and then enhance the user experience. So we have three functional capabilities in Semaphore. And we'll start over at the left in enrichment. And our the enrichment capability allows us to enrich each information asset with tags that define what an asset is about. So, as a good example, if you have data that you want to analyze for a targeted marketing campaign, and let's say you have a sales receipt, and when it looks at that item, it will know that the item number, is a family of keychains for the Elsa character from the movie Frozen. And so when you take that cash register receipt, you can add the additional information, the context, that says this is an Elsa keychain, and so this person has an interest in the movie Frozen. The second capability is harmonization. And this allows us to bring together disparate information sources throughout the enterprise using a single canonical model. So a good example of we have here, a data lake contains measurements from many different sensors. They can be anywhere. And each sensor may use a different vocabulary to measure tolerance. But by taking that single model and creating alternative labels and other relationships, we can bring all those together. We can bring all those sensors together. And finally, extraction. And this allows us to extract facts, entities, and relationships. In this situation, so banks need to demonstrate to a regulator that they have sufficient assets to survive an unfavorable market condition. So it's called stress testing. The information they need are buried in all of those information assets, and Semaphore is able to go in and extract that information to create the entities, facts, and relations. So information like dates, owners of companies, products, things like that. So where does Semaphore fit in the enterprise? Well, it fits right in the middle. It sits between the applications and the external links, the applications, content, systems on which you see on the bottom, and between the applications on the top that you're trying to use it with. And it wouldn't be complete unless we talked about our products and services. So we have on the product, we offer product development and maintenance, and this is kind of what we're talking about today, the cloud, the hybrid, on-premise. We offer maintenance, 24/7 software incident support, patch and upgrade, documentation, and our Life with Semaphore portal. We also offer professional services, and our professional services team they work with our customers to accelerate deployments and to help you maximize the return on investment. They're knowledgeable in ontology management, classification, content management, Drupal graph store, enterprise search. We have a great training. It's a self-paced, short videos and student exercises that allows you to learn how to use the tools, as well as how to as well as a session on systems administration and integration. And we have a full set of partners, industry-leading technology organizations who we partner with, system implementation specialists, and industry consultants who we partner with to help us deliver Semaphore to a large group of organizations. So use cases. So what are our customers using Semaphore for? In the healthcare space, we have customers who are using Semaphore to perform detailed comparison of health plan benefits. Customers can search to see if specific to see if specific illnesses are covered. They also are using it to harmonize enterprise and external data to gain some market intelligence. In the manufacturing space, we have customers who are mining external information to look to see if there's incidents of patent infringements on patents that they hold. They also are looking to use it to develop partnership opportunities. And in the financial services, We have customers who are delivering automated digital labor to support regulatory compliance or automate manual processes. And finally, in pharma or life sciences, where customers are using it to examine and analyze real-world evidence, and they're using it to manage the clinical trial management to improve their processes and results. And with that, I will turn it over to Steve, and he will do a demo. And okay, take it away, Steve.
Thank you very much, Anne, and very good for you to have stepped in there at the last minute, and it sounds like you're suffering a bit from the hay fever. Hello, everybody. My name is Steve Rice. I've been asked to give a bit of a demonstration today of our Semaphore Cloud Development offering. Because obviously, you know, we've talked a lot about the business use cases and the products itself. It's always useful to actually see the product in action. So I'd like to take a few minutes of your time to do that. So the first thing we need to do with Semaphore Cloud is actually go to the cloud itself. So we go to the standard URL for Semaphore Cloud, and you'll see on this screen that it's asking me to log in, obviously, to tell the system who I am. The one thing I'll point out here is you have this big button over here, Register Now. So anybody that wants to use a Semaphore Cloud has to use this option to register themselves. And if I click on that button, it's the standard sort of information you'd expect to see from any registration form. But what I will also point out is on the right side of the screen here is we have the ability to actually use different external authentication access mechanisms. Now, this is for the situation where obviously you've got yet another system. You've got Semaphore Cloud, you've got your Microsoft Outlook, you've got your live.com, you've got your Gmail account, et cetera, et cetera. You've got all these other accounts. You don't want to have yet another one for Semaphore Cloud. So we've actually integrated with different authentication mechanisms, such as the three you see here, to allow you to just leverage those existing authentication providers, so you don't need to use that a different account for this particular system. So, for example, we've got login with Active Directory. This is Azure Active Directory, and this is login with your Google account, and this could also be a commercial Google account. And the final one is login with Microsoft. So, again, you don't need to go and get a whole new set of credentials for using Semaphore Cloud. You can use any of these mechanisms if you're currently using them in your company. Now today I'm actually registered using my Microsoft Azure Active Directory account, so I'm just going to click on that option, and you'll see I've already logged in with Microsoft Azure in another Active Directory, in another tab here, so it hasn't even asked me to log back in. It's just gone straight into Semaphore Cloud. And this is the first thing that a typical user will see when they connect to Semaphore Cloud. A number of big buttons, I think, are the most obvious things on this page, other than the welcome message at the top, of the different things you can actually do with Semaphore Cloud. So obviously they're just simple point and click type things. Another thing to point out here is I'm actually what's called a tenant administrator. Now, every particular client that registers for using Semaphore Cloud has their own isolated environment, that is their own set of services and products that they can access within what we call a tenancy. So right now I'm in my own tenancy. I can't actually access or see anybody else's information. I can't see their users, I can't see any of their data, I can see nothing. So what this allows me to do, though, is it does allow me to maintain the information within my tenancy itself. So for example, up in the top left corner, you'll see the three horizontal lines. That's the typical context menu. And you see I've got a couple of administrative options here that are not shown on the main screen. So for example, if I was to click on users and perform a search, I'm only going to see the users that are relevant for my particular tenancy. In this case, it's just the webinar tenancy. So we've got Anne, who can't be with us, the Anne who can be, and myself. So if I wanted, in this case, if I want to actually mess with the permissions, I can set the security for individual users as I wish. So I'm going to do a little bit of an example here, and I'm going to pick on Anne, and I'm going to say, oh, she's been maintaining the model, but she no longer needs to maintain the model. Maybe she's moved over to working on integration. She's become a developer instead. She no longer needs to access the model. So I can actually revoke her model privileges, her access to what we call the ontology editor application. So if I go to the tenant tab here, the services tab here, you'll see that there's two permissions here for ontology editor, one for administration and one for users. So I'm going to say, no, she doesn't have access to it anymore. I'm
Guess I
sorry,
can't get my job done.
Yeah, sorry about that. Well, I guess I can change it back for you, but okay. But the other thing is, so it's easy, as you can see, just to change the permissions. It's just click the buttons, press save, it's done. And actually, to see this in action, if I see myself here on the bottom, if I actually change my own permissions, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove my ability to actually look at the support option. If you see it on the left, there's a support option. If I click on save, you'll see the changes taking effect immediately. So as soon as I make configuration changes for security, I can see those changes straight away. So while we're talking about that, if we click on the support option, all these different services and tools that we have within the system all have various bits of information that are generated as you use them. For example, you've gone and used the ontology editor, or you've gone and you've accessed the classification server. You've done all these different things. This is actually allows you to access the support logs. So if you want to see what the requests were and what's happened with them, you can use this facility. This is just a simple debugging facility that we provide. The other thing I'll point out here is I've just gone back to the home page, and you have a settings link. The settings link allows you to set up things like authentication providers for your tenancy and the name of the tenancy. If you're not happy with that demonstration, you can change that. And continuing with the user interface introduction, over here on the right, you've got a feed from our Life with Semaphore website. So this is, the Life with Semaphore website contains a series of articles that have been written by our consultants and also by the product delivery team to give you a little bit of a heads up as to what's happening with the product and how to use the product more effectively. You'll see that it's got an announcement about the 40246 release, which was done a couple days ago. The other thing I'll point out up top right corner here is you got a little bell. If I click on that, this is actually where any notifications will appear. So if I've spun up, if I've added additional services and things like that, it will actually display the status of the provisioning process here. It'll show you exactly what's happening as it happens. Under my name, there's a number of different options here. The obvious log off option, but also there's an account option. This shows some information about me, myself. I can go and adjust my password if I've actually logged in directly. If I want to add any external logins so that I can, if I not only use, in this case, my Microsoft Active Directory login, but if I want to maybe link up my Gmail account as well, I can do that here by just clicking on Manage Logins and specifying the login details there. The other thing which we will talk about in more details in a few minutes is this API key, which you use for accessing any of the application programming interfaces provided by Semaphore services. I'm going to return to the home here, and what I like to do is, so that's the user interface, and I think I hope you agree that it's fairly easy to use and navigate. You've got the context menu here, and you've got these big buttons in the middle. But what we'll do is we're going to start with something that Anne mentioned in the introductory slides, and that is with the model. The key part of any Semaphore implementation is the model. The model encapsulates all your business logic, encapsulates all of the concepts and the concept organization, the metadata, the attributes attached to those concepts. All that stuff is stored in what Semaphore calls a model. And the program that we use, the application we use to update these models is called Ontology Editor. So if I click through to Ontology Editor, this is, as I said, the facility that you use to update models, but it's also the facility you use to configure fact and entity extraction functionality as well. So in this case, we've got 4 sample models that are included with any Semaphore implementation. And what we're going to do is today we're going to pick on something called space missions. So this particular model I'll explain. If I click on it, the first thing it does is, for your information, displays the number of concepts. It tells me when it was last edited and the number of users that have access to this. The other thing, before I talk about the model itself, is if I click on Edit Model Settings, it actually allows me to set the permissions for this model. So even within your company, you may wish to have certain people updating certain models other people updating other models, maybe other people can look at the models but maybe not update. All these sort of things you can set within these permissions at the bottom of the page here. In this case, what we've done is we've actually set the permissions on a group basis so that anybody that belongs to this group called Semaphore users has what's called viewer access, which means they can't edit anything. But the Semaphore administrators have management access. That means they can go and update things and pretty much do anything they want to the model. But let's talk about this model itself. The space missions model is based around a set of concepts for the Apollo missions in the 1960s. So the space missions from NASA that put the man on the moon. So if I click on Edit Master, before I do that actually, before I forget, over here you see how it says Create New Task. When you're working on models, obviously you may wish to have different versions of the model that are being reviewed or implemented at different times. So what a task allows you to do is group changes into a review process. So you would create a new task that says, I'm introducing a new product. And then within that task is effectively a copy of the model that you can adjust with the changes required for that new product or service that you're providing. So you adjust your model, and then you can commit that task back into the master model itself. So you can phase your changes in using these tasks things. So you don't have to worry about making changes and having all of your systems immediately see the changes. You want to work on those changes, make sure they're all correct before you actually commit them into the master model. But in this case, we're going to be really brave, and we're going to go straight into the master model by clicking on the Edit Master link. So the first thing you'll notice whenever you look at a model is you have a list of top-level concept schemes on the left here. And these are basically just containers for concepts. So if I were to expand people, for example, it shows me a bunch of different categories of people. You've got Australian Space Agency, Brazilian Space Agency, Canadian Space Agency, and if you go down here, there's NASA. If I was to collapse people and expand, say, places, then you've got, oh, that's not terribly interesting. How about programs and missions? Programs and missions, you've got the Apollo Space Program. Remember I said this is all based on the 1960s, 1960s space missions. Apollo Soyuz was also around at the same time, but Copernicus and the International Space Station I think was just starting up by that point. So these are all just different groups of concepts, and as I drill down into these, you'll see that it gets more and more specific. Obviously, if I go into Apollo Space Program, I'm going to see the different Apollo missions, with Apollo 11 being the one that went on land on the moon. And if I click on, there's even a further subcategory here called Canceled Apollo Missions, and I can see those canceled missions. What we're going to do today is, if you were attending the first webinar about a month ago, you'll see that I picked on Neil Armstrong. Well, I'm not going to disappoint you today. I'm going to pick on Neil Armstrong again, but I don't exactly know where he is in this model, so I'm actually just going to start typing his name. And what it's going to do is it's going to give me some suggestions, a little drop down here about which particular concept I might be interested in. If I hover over top of that, you see there's a little pop-up here that actually shows me some additional information about it, so I'm sure that I've got the right person. If there are multiple Neil Armstrongs, of course, I'd have them listed here and I'd be able to hover over them and see that information about them. So I'm just going to click on that person. I do indeed mean that, Neil Armstrong. And you'll notice a couple things. The first thing is it's displayed the concept information here on the right, but also on the left in that hierarchy that we were looking at earlier, it's expanded it to exactly where Neil Armstrong appears in that list. So again, I don't have to hunt around here for that concept. I can just start typing. Just another little feature that we have in the ontology editor application. So what information have we got about Neil Armstrong? We have a number of different preferred labels for this, for Neil Armstrong in different languages. It looks like Spanish and English are one and the same for Neil Armstrong, but certainly the Japanese is quite a bit different than the French. And if we scroll down a little bit more, you can see that we've actually we've got some external content that's been linked in here. So if you're using the semantic web, I've got a DBpedia URI here that links to that semantic web reference. And we've got the Wikidata, URI here as well. And we've got what I believe to be an unflattering image of Neil Armstrong here and in the actual metadata itself. Over here on the right, you'll see we've got related concepts. These are concepts over here in the model that are related to Neil Armstrong. No surprise there that Apollo 11 is related since he was the pilot, the captain for the mission, pilot. And he was also on the Gemini 8 mission, so he also accrued that. And we have several broader topics. These are concepts that appear higher up in the hierarchy as immediate parents of Neil Armstrong. And you'll see that NASA and man and soonest are two broader concepts. And if you see here on the left, you'll see indeed that man in space soonest is a parent or a broader concept of Neil Armstrong. Now, what you can do here is, obviously, if I want to actually edit any of this information, this is all fine and dandy showing all this, but I actually want to change something, I can just, if I just click on it, it actually allows me to make any changes I'd like to make, and if I press OK, it'll save it. In this case, I'm going to cancel my changes. But in the same way, I can add new concepts by clicking on the Create button here, the plus option here on the left, or the X button to delete, sort of as you'd expect to see in any sort of modern user interface. So once you've gone to all the trouble of putting this model together, you've encapsulated all your business logic into this structure and all these preferred labels, alternate labels, metadata, hierarchy, concepts, all this sort of stuff you've put into this model. You actually want to start using this. After all, this is just a list. It's a glorified spreadsheet perhaps, but it's got far more advanced information from here. What we do is we take this and we then publish it to the other core Semaphore components. And how do you do that? Well, you click up here on this little master menu here. There's a little drop down, if you can see the little down arrow. And I click on something called Publish Model. And if I click on Publish Model, you'll see it brings up a little pop-up that lists different configurations that are available to me. So not only can you say, I want this model to be pushed out to the Semaphore components, you can also say how you want it pushed out to those components. In this case, I've just got a single configuration listed, but I could have several based upon particular requirements. Perhaps I only want certain portions of the model to be pushed out to certain systems or certain services. Well, I can actually define a separate configuration and set that configuration to do as I wish. So in this way, the user going out and publishing the model, all they have to do is just select from the list of published configurations and then just click the Publish button. In this case, I haven't made any changes to the model, so there's no need for me to publish, so I'm just going to hit the Close button here. Another thing, of course, to notice, you got the log file here, so if you're really interested to see what happened during that publish, you can actually just click on that. It'll show you the log file. So now, this is the model. It's been published. Let's go out there and actually see it in action. So first off, I'm going to return back to Semaphore Cloud so you can see that that's where we are. And what we're going to do today is, again, if you saw the original presentation that I gave a month ago, we talked a little bit about SharePoint Online. And that's a useful way of showing the Semaphore Cloud functionality because, after all, it is a Office 365 component and it's out there on the web. It's completely web-based. So since Semaphore Cloud is also web-based, it's a very good fit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to a site collection that I created earlier in SharePoint Online. So you can see it's at SharePoint.com and it's a webinar site collection. So it's not terribly interesting, the first page. I haven't done anything to customize it. Of course, you'd have your logos and all your little buttons and things like that here. I haven't done anything like that. All I've done is I've actually deployed the Semaphore Cloud application for SharePoint Online to this site collection, so now I can actually use it. If I click on Documents, this particular document library has been set up to use my particular webinar tenancy, and so you can see here that I've already uploaded several Wikipedia entries, again having to do with the Apollo missions. I've got Apollo 11, Apollo 13 Wikipedia articles. I've got Buzz Aldrin's autobiography from Wikipedia and Jim Lovell's as well. All again were on Apollo 11 with Neil Armstrong. In the enterprise keywords here, you'll see that it's listed a bunch of concepts. Now these are not things, oh, sorry about that. Sometimes because we're dealing with SharePoint Online, you have to deal with what Microsoft throws at you. But in this enterprise keywords, if you're familiar with SharePoint or SharePoint Online, you recognize enterprise keywords as a standard SharePoint column. So what am I showing you here? These are concepts from Semaphore that the Semaphore product itself has said are relevant for this particular PDF, this particular article from Wikipedia. So all I have to do, if I want to say, I've got my Neil Armstrong autobiography here from Wikipedia, again, another PDF, and I'm going to drag and drop it right into SharePoint Online. It's going to take a few seconds to upload, And what is this doing? Well, like I said earlier, I've installed the app into SharePoint Online. And so all this it does is it connects that to Semaphore Cloud, and it will it automatically sends the document to Semaphore Cloud, the classification service, and returns the concepts into SharePoint Online. But from my perspective, I've just dragged and dropped the document. Okay, you see that I've gone into properties here, and what it's doing is it's showing me that actually Semaphore is classifying this content. You see that has gone away now, and if you look in enterprise keywords, it shows me some concepts from my model that I looked at earlier, my space missions model. Those concepts it believes are relevant for this particular article from Wikipedia. And I haven't done anything for that. All I've done is just drag and drop the document. And obviously the configuration in SharePoint Online is adding that app that I mentioned earlier and configuring this document library to talk to a particular model that I designate within Semaphore Cloud. So that it's just a quick little demonstration to show you that I've quickly and easily I've added a site collection. I've just dragged and dropped my content into a site collection that has Semaphore enabled on it, and it sends it off to the Semaphore Cloud services to do automatic classification. So let's take a little look, a bit more detail in some of these services. So that's all great and dandy, seeing how SharePoint Online looks to the end user, but how can I actually get that to work? I want to use that not in SharePoint Online, but I want to use that with my particular content management system or any other local integration you might have that wants to do things that Semaphore can provide, like automatic classification. Let's take a look at how that is actually done. Now earlier what I did is underneath here I showed you my account details, and in the account details we had what's called an API key. Now with Semaphore Cloud we provide access to what we call our application programming interfaces. There are a number of core APIs that are provided with Semaphore Cloud that allow you to do various things. One of them is automatic classification. Another one is the ontology editor API. And the ontology editor API, that of course does things like allows you to do whatever ontology editor can do. So what is that? Add concepts, add models, update concepts. You can do all sorts of things with whatever you think of you can do in the interface. You can do that through the ontology editor API. But let's take a look more in the one example that we're talking about, this automatic classification side of things. The automatic classification is provided by something called the classification server component of Semaphore. And here in the Semaphore Cloud interface, it actually allows me a quick little interface to that service. So if I click here on the little beaker, if I click on that, this is a little tool that comes with classification server that allows me to quickly test classification for any particular content that I wish to classify. So in this case, I'm going to pick on that Neil Armstrong Wikipedia article again. I'm going to drag it and drop it, and I'm going to click the big button that says send for classification. And now what it's done is it's gone and sent that PDF off to the classification service in Semaphore Cloud, and it's first extracted the information out of the document. So you see a bunch of text over here that's the equivalent of that PDF. But also here on the left, you'll see there's a list of categories that classification server has determined to be relevant for this particular document. So Neil Armstrong, I don't think that's any surprise. NASA, I don't think that's a surprise either. Over here in the second column, you'll see there's something called the score. This is the degree of confidence at which Semaphore believes this particular concept is relevant. So in the case of NASA, it's 100% sure that this document is talking something about NASA. And Neil Armstrong, well, it's not quite so sure, but it's about 99% sure. Astronaut, 99%, etc. One thing you'll note here is that it doesn't show me all the concepts. It actually shows me a lot more concepts than what I see when I was in SharePoint Online here. You see I've only got, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 concepts here, but here I have considerably more. And why that is because we've told SharePoint Online that we actually don't want to see any concepts that score below a particular threshold. That is, where the score is below a particular value. So the ones at the bottom here, because they're of a lower relevancy, we believe that they do not need to be shown in SharePoint Online. But this particular interface shows me all of the concepts in case I want to do something with that. The other interesting thing about this is if I click on a concept, it'll actually show me where in the document evidence has been found for that concept. So why do you think Neil Armstrong is relevant for this document? Well, you can click on the concept there and it'll show you what part of the documents has contributed to that particular concept being returned. So I'm going to return back to Semaphore Cloud here. And what I'd like to do now is show you a little bit about actually the API access itself. So this is a little web interface that allows you to test the classification, but let's actually take a little bit a look at the basic API itself. So if you notice there's a little eye icon beside the beaker, and if I click on that, it opens a second tab here, and it shows me some information about how to use the basic API. Now the basic API provides access to some of the core Semaphore services. In this case, Semantic Enhancement Server, which we haven't talked about, and Classification Server, which we just saw. Semantic Enhancement Server is a read-only high-speed copy of your model. Now if you think about it, when we're in Ontology Editor looking at that model, and I was clicking around, that's all fine and it works okay, but in an end user implementation, we want something that is extremely fast and extremely performant because, for example, if I have searches you type, if I start typing something, I want the search results to be returned immediately. I don't want to have to wait 4 or 5 seconds for those recommendations to come up. So we provide a product called Semantic Enhancement Server, which is a high-speed cache of your model. So in that publish process that we saw earlier, it creates that cache of your model so that Semantic Enhancement Server can very quickly return concepts and model information to your services. So, and as I mentioned already about Classification Server, now what this is doing is it's showing me what the endpoints are. These are real web URLs that you can use to access your service. Now, obviously, this is just a URL. I could send that to my neighbor, or I could publish that on CNN website or something like that. But nobody can use that unless they have access to your tenancy. And how do they access your tenancy? And it's through that API key I showed you a few minutes ago under my account. So this URL is used in conjunction with that API key to generate a session token that is used for any API requests. So and you'll see that this page actually describes the process to you, how to generate that token, how to use it, etc. And this is actually a live page. So this is showing me my real API key. So what does that mean? I've got some examples here. If I actually literally, I'm going to just copy this example here, and I'm going to paste it into a PowerShell prompt. You'll see that we've got some examples in PowerShell, C# and Java here. And because PowerShell is quite easy to show, so I'm just going to open a PowerShell prompt, and I'm going to paste that example. Now what this is going to do is this talking to our Semantic Enhancement Server service. And this is going to return, again, that high-speed cache of the model information. And in this case, I'm looking at a list of the top-level concept schemes. So if I hit enter, I see people, places, programs, emissions, and vehicles. And if you recall, that's exactly what we see in Ontology Editor. If I click on Ontology Editor and go to Space Missions, you'll see that the top-level concept schemes are people, places, programs, emissions, and vehicles, exactly like we're seeing here from this PowerShell. The information beside it, that's actually a unique identifier for that concept, so it uniquely identifies. You can have concepts that have the same name in your model, so this uniquely identifies which particular concept you're talking about. There's another example down here talking about classification. So again, I can just copy and paste this example quickly. And in this case, it's talking about classification, so it says, give me something to classify. So I select Neil Armstrong's biography again, hit enter, and sure enough, it lists the concepts that we saw in the classification analysis tool interface just a few minutes ago. Okay, so again, this is displayed in any sort of format I want. This is just a demonstration to show you that it's returning all the information you'd expect to see from Classification Server. The other thing I'll point out is that so I also mentioned that you have the ability to interface directly with the Ontology Editor application. That is your model in order to do things like add concepts and things like that. That's a bit more complicated to show. We don't have an example there, but I can actually use the Postman utility. If you've ever coded with any sort of APIs, you might have used this utility. So for example, I'm going to use this little sample request here. You'll see it's just a sample URL here. And if I send this to Semaphore Cloud, it lists, in this case, it's just a list of models. It gives me a list of all the models in Ontology Editor that are available to me. Similarly, I could do the same sort of thing we saw in the PowerShell example. I've got semantic enhancement server returning a list of concepts at the top level. So we've got people again, and if we scroll down a little bit more, I'm sure we're going to find there's a lot of people. If I scroll down, we're going to see, there we go, places, programs, emissions, etc. So those are the top level concepts that we saw earlier. All of these APIs are discussed in the portal, in the Smartlogic customer portal over here. So in the portal, there is a set of product documentation. If I click on that, you'll see that at the bottom here, we have programming API documentation. There's information about how to use the Ontology Editor API that we just saw being used in Postman. There's also the Cloud API, which I'll show you in a second, and a couple other little introductory articles. The other thing I'll point out is the classification server API is discussed here in the developer's guide at this link here. And then we've got the semantic enhancement server developer's guide here, which shows you all the different calls that you can make, how to call the API, and all the different reference material and things like this. One last thing I'll show you is we've talked about APIs for the different services. This Semaphore Cloud itself has its own API. So what does this mean? This means that anything you can do in Semaphore Cloud, anything you can do with Semaphore, you can actually do via code. You can write an application to do anything you're seeing here. So publishing the model, accessing the classifications, classifying content, returning model information, all that sort of stuff can be done if you write some code to do it using these APIs. And even the cloud itself has its own API. So I can do things like add users to Semaphore Cloud automatically using this basic API. So a simple example here is under basic information. You see this is a dynamic document here. This actually is real live information. If I click on this particular example, it gives me some documentation about how to use it, but if I click on try it out, it actually has gone and executed that particular command. It gave me the actual response. In this case, it shows me that I'm actually, this request actually shows me, it shows me return details of the current tenant, which is webinar demonstration. So you see it gives me the information about that tenancy. So again, it's a very useful thing. You can just, I don't have to, and actually I've got the sample how to actually use it given right here. So I've got a sample curl command here, for example. So it gives me exactly what I'd expect to see and how it works. So when you're a developer, obviously this is very useful so that I can know that everything's working correctly. So what I'd like to do now is pick up from where we left off in the presentation. So this is all fine and dandy. It's quite complicated. There's a lot of functionality here, and you may need some assistance as you go along, and there may be questions that come up. So we have a lot of support options available to you. The first thing is that customer portal, which I just briefly showed you, and that gives you extensive documentation for all our products and APIs, as well as access to the 24/7 customer support system. You leave a message in the middle of the night on Christmas Eve, you're going to get a response within an hour. You have the Life with Semaphore blog. The Life with Semaphore blog includes, like I said, those real-world examples of how to use Semaphore, as well as product announcements, like I said earlier. The Smartlogic website itself is also very useful because it contains not only marketing material and information about product positioning and different use case studies, but it also contains summaries about the products itself. So it explains what Ontology Editor is, it explains what classification server is, it explains all these other things to you. It explains what Semaphore Cloud is. From a programming perspective, we also have a Maven repository and a GitHub repository. The Maven repository contains various standard Maven repository artifacts such as the Java API, some source code and examples. The GitHub contains more source code, including a .NET Client API in the GitHub repository itself. And also, as Anne mentioned earlier, we have several training options available to you. We regularly schedule product training, product user training, and technical training can be arranged as you wish. So there's an extensive amount of training available. So Anne, did you want to pick up on this?
Yes, thanks, Steve. Thanks for the great demo. So I guess in summary, just before we head on to the Q&A, Semaphore Cloud is a modular semantic platform, and as we said, you get to choose we have flexible options. You choose the options that you need, and you can easily add on options as your needs change. As we saw, we have organizations across multiple industries, multiple sizes. They're integrating Semaphore into their business solutions and doing it quite successfully. And finally, we have a broad range of support options to help you get the most out of your Semaphore investment. And with that, I'll take some questions. So first I'll just answer one quick one here. Can I send out the handout and the recording after the webinar? Yes, you will receive an email in the next day or so that will have both the recording and the slides. Okay, so we have a couple questions here for you, Steve.
Okay.
Can models be easily migrated from the development environment into a production environment?
Yeah, even within Semaphore, Semaphore Cloud provides you a cloud-based interface for Semaphore, but you can do this even with Semaphore itself, and that is what you can do is migrating from one environment to another is a matter of doing exporting your models and your configuration from one environment and importing it into the other. And really, within Semaphore Cloud, that option remains the same. So you would go into your model, I'm ready for this to go into production now. You export that model, you go into your production system, you import the model again, and then you go and publish it. So the process is very similar to what you see on in a standard on-premise installation, but the process is the same. So you just migrate your models from one environment to another.
Great. Okay, here's another one. Is there a way to get back the evidence that resulted in classification?
I'm not sure exactly what this is referring to. The classification analysis tool is a user interface for classification. And actually, if we go back to that, it might be more obvious as to what I'm talking about. If I go back here, sorry. I'm going to switch back to cloud. And if we go back to that test interface that we were looking at a few minutes ago, I'm going to submit that same document again. Within this, obviously this is a nice user interface for showing me the particular evidence so Neil Armstrong the concept has fired, and these are the particular elements of the model, of the document that it believes are contributing to that concept. But actually you can see even further detail if you click on View XML. So when I'm calling this with an API, or if I'm calling this my system, I can actually this is just a nice user interface for showing the information coming back, but actually there's a lot more detail included in the actual response coming back from classification server, and this is what this is showing here. You'll see that what it's doing is it's actually showing me in a very detailed way exactly what elements of the model have contributed to particular concepts coming back. These are relative positionings and exactly which rules have fired. And if you're familiar with Semaphore, rules are something that we actually publish when you do the publish process. What exactly has happened? Over here on the right, it's also showing me the evidence rule tree for, and again, if you're familiar with Semaphore, these are the particular rules that have fired through actually for Neil Armstrong. So you get a lot of, you can trace a lot of this information right back to, all the way back to the concepts, from the classification results to what's been published, all the way back to the model itself. Okay.
We're getting a number of questions here. I'm just kind of evaluating here. Do we have any plans to integrate Semaphore with Drupal, the Drupal CMS, like we do with SharePoint?
I don't believe there's any plans immediately to do that. I think that somebody was talking about doing it. There was some conversation about that a few months ago. Because the APIs are quite open, we use very common API standards for communicating to these web services. For example, JSON, XML, these are the common outputs from our web services. That means they can effectively be integrated into anything you can think of. So Drupal being an example, it's a matter of simply coding these If you want to do it in JavaScript or something like that, that can be done. But as far as Drupal specifically, like I said, there was some discussion about it a couple months ago, but I'm not aware of any particular integration that's been done so far.
Okay. And we have some additional ones. Here's one. The rule-based classification API look very slick. I'll start by saying thank you. Do you offer non-rule-based or case-based classification? Let me explain a bit more. Do you have an API for learning based on the corpus and then classifying the new data?
What the Semaphore ethos and the way we think about things is we try to avoid the automatic, the artificial intelligence sort of method of determining how classification works, because we believe that you understand your concepts and your information in a better fashion than any computer can understand. So we don't. Within the Semaphore product, there are not any automatic learning facilities for generating these rules and things like that. That you actually encapsulate that logic in the model when you create it in ontology editor. And the way you define the rules and things like that, that's how you capture your business knowledge. You can send it, you can send Semaphore, of course, thousands and thousands of documents, and we've got several tools that are available to allow you to analyze the classification results. And what that allows you to do is it allows you to take all of those results and say, okay, all these documents are referring to a concept that's not in the model. Maybe I want to go back and add that concept to the model. So you can then take a look at all the phrases and words that have come back and logical entities that have been extracted from your documents, and then drag and drop them into your model very quickly. So in that way, you can send it large documents, and then from those documents extract a common set of vocabulary that you can then use in your model. I hope that's answered the question.
I think you did. And then we have a couple more basic questions. So can you tell us how to get a customer portal account? How does one get a customer portal account to have access to all this great documentation?
The customer portal account normally comes with, when you sign on for some with Semaphore to purchase our product, you get a customer portal account. And if you have somebody if you're already if you're already a customer of Smartlogic, you can have somebody that's using the customer portal already request an account be created for you. But there's also an email address you can email. It's licensing@smartlogic.com, and request a portal account. Generally, even if you're not a customer of Smartlogic, we'll have a chat with you about whether you'd be best suited to get an access to the customer portal, just to have a look at the documentation or provide you with the information that you're looking for.
Okay. And another one, are you planning to include classification review tool and ontology review tool into this cloud service?
Yeah, I didn't demonstrate it, but we already do. The classification review tool and the ontology review tool are already included in Semaphore Cloud. I just, for the sake of time, I didn't actually demonstrate it today, but it's one of the things we provide.
Okay, and then we had, going through here, I think we've gotten most of them. Oh, wait, one more. This webinar seemed geared toward people that know about Semaphore, be interested in using the cloud service to learn how it all works. Do we have any beginning tutorials for people?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that a lot of what we do, and if you start looking through the documentation, you can very quickly get into the details. But one thing you might have missed maybe when I was over here in the product documentation is the very top it talks about Introduction to Semaphore. So this particular document gives you a first basics understanding of how Semaphore works. And as far as Semaphore Cloud is concerned, it's even easier than if you start looking through all this documentation. It's talking a lot about on-premise or local installations. But with Semaphore Cloud, everything's actually accessible to you right in the user interface. So you just click buttons. So the concepts that are discussed in Introduction to Semaphore document very easily and very quickly relate to the user interface you see in Semaphore Cloud. So what I would suggest is that you start with the Introduction to Semaphore document, and then go back and forth with Semaphore Cloud, and you'll be able to very quickly see how they mesh up. And you can use this test interface that I was showing you here to see how classification works. Click through the ontology editor, but it also, of course, encourage you to take or consider taking one of the training courses we offer. Of course, you'll have the video from this presentation as well to look through, so hopefully you can follow me without my clicking around too fast for you.
Okay. Let's see. Checking here. I think that's it. I think we've dealt with the questions.
One thing I did see mentioned was about where is the data stored, and this I think is a very important thing to mention here, is that none of your data is actually stored in Semaphore Cloud. The only information that is stored in Semaphore Cloud as far as your tenancy is concerned is your model. Okay, so none of your documents or anything like that are actually stored physically on the Semaphore Cloud infrastructure. So when I submitted this document here for classification, this document is not stored in any way in Semaphore Cloud. All it does is it processes the documents. It sends me the processed document results, but the document itself is not retained. So the issues of privacy and confidentiality of your data is preserved. The other thing to point out is that, of course, all of these communications with Semaphore Cloud are encrypted. We always use HTTPS protocol, for example, and of course you also have the authentication mechanism as well. So we have lots of mechanisms that we put into place to ensure that your data is kept as secure as possible, including not storing that locally.
And maybe just, we're getting close to being out of time, but maybe just a follow-up, you could mention, what information is backed up, how frequently is it backed up, and is there any redundancy in the backups?
That's also a good question, and something that comes up a lot, because of course now that if you're using Semaphore Cloud, what you're using is actually in our hands, because obviously we're maintaining the software for you and maintaining the whole system for you. Your models and things like that are actually backed up every day, daily, onto a secondary backup process facility. We also have the ability to provide redundant services should you require them. A lot of the Semaphore Cloud infrastructure we use is already itself redundant, so there's a lot of overlap of the services that we provide, and that's basically it, yeah. But like I said, if you do require, for example, higher speed classification and things like this, if you have a serious classification requirement that maybe you're finding that your service in Semaphore Cloud is a bit too slow, we can certainly arrange to increase the performance and increase the redundancy of your services to provide the speed, performance, and redundancies that you require as well. So for disaster recovery, etc.
Okay, well, it looks like we're out of time. Thanks for doing the demo today, and thanks for everyone for joining us. And with that, we'll let you all get back to your day. Have a great one.